The rain had not stopped since dawn, and by the time the carriages drew up before Harrogate Court, the great gravel sweep had turned to a brown soup that pulled at every wheel and every boot. The first guests of the autumn shooting party arrived in their dark blue coats and their warm furs, stepping down onto planks the footman had laid across the worst of it, and not one of them looked twice at the woman who came up the long avenue on foot. She walked with a child's hand in hers, her gray cloak heavy with water, the hem of it black to the knee with mud, and she did not lower her head the way a woman in her position was expected to lower it. She kept her eyes on the house. A gentleman on the steps, tall and dry beneath the portico, watched her come, and felt his mouth tighten before he knew why. The boy beside her was perhaps 6 years old, and he had her coloring in someone else's jaw. That was the first thing the gentleman noticed, though he did not yet let himself know that he had noticed it. The second thing he noticed was that she had stopped at the foot of the steps and was looking up at him as though she had walked a great distance to do exactly that, and was not finished. Stay with me through what happens on these steps, because the room is about to decide who this woman is, and it is going to be wrong. The gentleman's name was Marcus, the Earl of Harrogate, and he had buried something 6 years ago that he had told no one, and he was about to be asked to dig it up in front of 40 people. He did not know that yet. He saw only a woman with mud to her knee, and a child too well spoken for her cloak, and he heard from the doorway behind him the voice of his mother, carried down the steps with the particular clarity she reserved for things she wished overheard. "Send that creature round to the kitchen door," the dowager said. "We do not receive vagrants at the front of the house." The woman on the gravel did not flinch. The boy did, a small recoil at the word, and his mother's hand closed tighter over his, and that was all. To the assembled guests on the steps, she was a beggar with a brat, a provincial nobody, who had wandered up the wrong avenue, and the room arranged its face accordingly. Unto Marcus she was something his body recognized before. His mind would consent to it, a stillness he had not felt in a long time, and he found that he had taken one step down toward her without deciding to. Her name was Eleanor Caro, and 3 years before this, she had been a governess in a respectable house in Bath, and before that, she had been something she could not say aloud on these steps. She had a letter folded against her breast, under the wet wool, that she had carried for 6 years and had sworn she would never use, and she had broken that vow only because her son had begun to cough in the night, and the lodging-house had turned cold and she had run out of every other door. She had not come to be received. She had come because there was nowhere left that she had not already tried. She had counted her coins on the coach the night before, copper by copper into her palm. And the counting had told her what she already knew, that there would be no second coach and no return. That this avenue was the last avenue. And she had folded the coins away and looked at her sleeping boy and decided that pride was a thing she could no longer afford to keep whole. She had brought it anyway, the last of it, up the long avenue in the rain, because a woman who arrives with nothing must at least arrive standing. "I have business with the Earl," she said. Her voice was low and even, and entirely without apology, and it carried further than the dowager's had because the rain had eased in that moment and the gravel had gone quiet. "I will state it to him, and to no one else, and then I will go." The dowager, Lady Margaret, came to the top of the steps, with her cane and her diamonds and the small, precise smile she used on inferiors who had not yet learned their place. She was a handsome woman of 60, who had spent 40 years protecting a name, and she had protected it well, and she did not intend to stop now. "My son has no business with women who arrive on foot," she said to the guests as much as to Eleanor Hawkins, the kitchen door. The butler moved. Eleanor did not. And Marcus, who had not spoken, said one word that stopped the butler where he stood. "Wait." It was not loud. It did not need to be. He came down the last 3 steps onto the planks, and then off the planks into the mud, ruining a boot that had cost more than Eleanor's whole cloak. And he stood in front of her in the brown water of his own avenue, while 40 people watched from the dry, and he looked at the boy, and then he looked at her, and something moved across his face that none of the guests had ever seen there. He was a man famous for his coldness. They called him the Frost Earl in the clubs, and they said he had not smiled since the year his young wife died. And they were nearly right. What they did not know was the shape of the thing under the frost. "Come inside," he said to her. The two words were a command, the way all his words were commands, and Eleanor heard the command and braced against it, because she had learned to brace against men who told her what to do. She did not hear yet. The thing folded inside the order, the thing the watching crowd could not hear either, but the rain seemed to. She heard only that she had been summoned, and she lifted her chin. "My son comes with me," she said. "Of course he does," said the Earl, and the of course was so plain, so without calculation, that the dowager's cane struck the stone once, sharply, as if to recall her son to himself. Inside, the hall of Harrogate Court rose 2 stories to a painted ceiling of clouds and chariots, and the warmth of it after the avenue made Eleanor's face ache. A fire the size of a doorway burned at the far end. Footmen took the wet cloaks of the guests, but did not know what to do with hers, and so she kept it, dripping, on her shoulders, and she stood in the middle of all that gold, with mud to her knee, and held her son against her side. The guests filtered past her into the drawing room with their eyes sliding over her, and away the particular not looking of people who've decided a person is not there. A young woman in ice-blue silk paused longest, a Miss Penhallow, the season's diamond, who had been brought to Harrogate by careful arrangement, and who understood at once that this dripping creature was a problem, though she could not yet see its shape. "Poor thing," the young woman murmured to the dowager, drawing off her gloves finger by finger. "Some discharged servant come to beg a character, I expect. They do grow bold." The dowager said nothing, because the dowager was watching her son, who had not gone in to his guests. He had stopped at the foot of the great stair and was looking at the boy, and the boy, with the directness of the very young, was looking back at him. And the resemblance that Eleanor had spent 6 years dressing in plain clothes and keeping out of good light was standing in the brightest hall in the county under a chandelier of 200 candles. Marcus crouched. It was not a thing earls did, and a footman actually started forward as if to prevent it. He crouched until his eyes were level with the child's, and he said, in a voice gone strange, "What is your name?" "Thomas," the boy said. "Thomas." The Earl repeated as though the word weighed something. He did not ask the surname. He looked instead at the small face, the jaw that was his own father's jaw, the brow that he saw every morning in the glass, and he stood up slowly, and he turned to Eleanor, and the whole bright hall seemed to lean in to hear what a man like that would say to a woman like her. He said, "Hawkins will show you to the green room. You will be dry within the hour." It was not what anyone expected, and the not expecting moved through the hall like a draught. The dowager's hand closed on her cane. Penhallow's smile held, but only just. And Eleanor, who had come prepared for the kitchen door and for refusal and for the constable, found that she did not know how to stand inside kindness and her composure, which had held through the rain, and a word vagrant in the long avenue very nearly broke over a green room and a promise of dry clothes. She mastered it. She had a great deal of practice at mastering it. And Marcus saw the small thing happen at the corner of her mouth, the way a person sees a fish turn under dark water, and he filed it away with everything else he was refusing to know. What no one in that hall understood was that the Earl of Harrogate had married twice, the first time everyone knew about. The second time he had told no one at all. Eleanor was given the green room, and a fire, and a gown borrowed from a housekeeper near her size, and she sat her son by the hearth and dried his hair with her own hands, and would let no maid do it. The house moved around her, vast and indifferent, and through the window she could see the shooting party assembling on the lawn. In the thin afternoon light, the dogs, the loaders, the gentlemen in their dark coats, and Marcus among them, with a gun broken over his arm. Not shooting, looking up at the house. She stepped back from the window. She knew that look. She had been the object of it once in another life, and she had been foolish enough then to believe it meant what it seemed to mean. She had been 17 when she first met him, a vicar's daughter with no fortune and too much sense, and he had been a young man not yet hardened, second son of the house, with an elder brother between him and the title and therefore free for a few bright months to do as he pleased. They had married in a country church with a sexton, and a sexton's wife for witnesses and no one else, because his brother would have stopped it and his mother would have ended it. He had gone to his regiment 3 weeks after the wedding, and his elder brother had died of a fever that same winter, and Marcus had become the heir. And then within the year, when the old earl followed his eldest son into the ground, the earl. And word had come to Eleanor in a letter, not in his hand, that the marriage had been a folly of his youth, that it could not be acknowledged, that a sum would be settled on her if she went quietly and never spoke. She had not taken the sum. She had taken the letter, the one true letter he had written her before the regiment, and she had gone. And 4 months later, in a cold room in Bath, she had borne his son and named him Thomas, for the brother Marcus had loved, and she had told the child his father was dead because in every way that mattered he was. She had believed Marcus had cast her off. That was the wound she carried, sharp as the day it was made. She did not know, could not have known, that the letter offering her the settlement had not come from him at all. She came down to dinner because she was sent for, and because to refuse would be to give the dowager the discourtesy she was plainly hoping for. She wore the housekeeper's gray gown, clean and plain among the silks, and she put her son to bed first with the housekeeper's own promise to sit by him, and she walked into the long dining room of Harrogate Court, where 30 places were laid in silver, and the candlelight ran the length of the table like a road. They had seated her below the salt, of course among the poor relations and the chaplain, as far from the earl as the table allowed. She took the place without complaint. She had eaten in worse rooms. The dowager held the head of the table opposite her son, and she conducted the dinner the way a general conducts a field. And twice she turned the conversation with great skill toward the subject of impostors. The country was full of them, she observed. Women who appeared at great houses with children and claims, hoping to extract by embarrassment what they could never win by right. It was a kindness, really, to send them away firmly at the first, before they could do themselves real harm. She said all of this without once looking at Eleanor, which was how everyone at the table knew exactly at whom it was aimed. "One must feel for the children," said Miss Penhallow from her place at the Earl's right hand. "Dragged about the country as props. There ought to be a law." Down the table, Eleanor set down her fork. She did not raise her voice. "There ought to be a law," she agreed, "against a great many things that are done to children. We are agreed on that, at least." It was the only thing she said for the length of 2 courses, and it landed in the candlelight and sat there. And the Earl at the far end heard it and looked down the road of light at the woman in gray, and the dowager saw him look. After dinner, the gentlemen did not linger long over their port, because the rain had come on again and there was nothing to do but the drawing-room. And it was in the corridor between the dim-paneled corridor with its single branch of candles that Marcus found Eleanor alone. She had slipped out to go up to her son, and he had left the other men deliberately. And they met in the narrow place between the dining room and the stair with no one to see, which was itself a transgression, and both of them knew it. "You should not be here," she said. "It will be remarked." "It is my corridor," he said. Then lower, the level voice cracking somewhere under the surface, "Eleanor." It was the first time he had said her name in 6 years. She had forgotten what it did to her, the particular weight he put on the middle of it, and her hand found the paneling and steadied there, and she was furious with her hand. "You will not call me that," she said. "You forfeited the right to it. You sent a letter. I sent no letter. I read it. It was very clear. A folly of your youth. A sum to be settled if I went quietly." Her voice did not rise, but it gathered, the way water gathers behind a wheel. "I did not take the sum. I want you to know that. Whatever you think I have come here for, I did not take your money then, and I will not take it now. I came because your son was cold, and I had tried every other door, and I am ashamed of that. and I will be gone in the morning." "Stop," he said. "Not a request." He had gone very pale in the candlelight, and his hand had risen toward her and stopped in the air between them, hovering, not arriving, because he had not yet earned the right to arrive, and some old discipline in him knew it. "Eleanor, I wrote you once from the regiment before my brother died. After that, I wrote you a dozen times, and you never answered. And I was told you had taken a settlement and gone, that you had wanted nothing but the money, that the child was not mine." He stopped. His jaw worked. "I was told a great many things in that year, by a person I trusted, while I was 400 miles away burying my brother and then my father. I believed them. That is my sin, and I will not pretend it is smaller than it is." She stared at him. The corridor was very quiet. Above them faintly came the sound of the drawing-room piano, Penhallow at the keys, playing something brilliant and cold. "By whom?" Eleanor said it was not quite a question. He did not answer. He did not have to. From the dining-room door where she had come to find her son, and instead found this. The dowager stood with her cane and her diamonds, and her face arranged into perfect, ruined composure. And the silence that came off her answered everything. For a moment, none of the three of them moved. The single branch of candles guttered in a draught from the hall, and the shadows leaned and righted themselves. And Eleanor understood, all at once and 6 years too late, the architecture of the thing that had been done to her. The false letter in the false hand. The false address that had sent a grieving man writing to a lodging that had never housed her. The careful, patient cruelty of a woman who had decided that a vicar's daughter was a stain to be quietly removed. She did not weep. She had wept all the tears that letter was owed in a cold room in Bath, a long time ago. She looked from the mother to the son and back again, and she said to the dowager in a voice without heat, "You let him think his own child was nothing. You let me think he had thrown us away. And you slept well, I expect, every night of 6 years." The dowager's chin lifted a fraction, which was answer enough, and Marcus made a sound low in his throat that was not quite a word, and turned from his mother, as a man turns from a window he can no longer bear to look out of. She came home to her old life and her old wound, but the house would not let her keep them. Over the days that followed, while the rain kept the party indoors and the dowager kept her schemes warm, Eleanor watched the Earl of Harrogate become a man she did not recognize, and yet remembered exactly. He sent a physician for Thomas's cough. He did not announce that he had done it. The housekeeper let it slip. He had a small horse brought up from the stables, a fat, ancient pony that had taught 3 generations of the family to ride, and Thomas was lifted onto it in the covered yard out of the rain. And the Earl walked beside the pony's head with his hand on the bridle and said almost nothing. And the boy, who had never had a father, looked down at the dark, composed man as though working out a sum he did not have all the figures for. The pony's name was Barley, the groom told Thomas, and it was older than anyone could rightly say, and it had a habit of stopping to consider tufts of hay that no longer existed. And at this, Thomas laughed. A sudden clear sound in the stoneyard that turned the Earl's head as though someone had spoken his own name. Marcus said nothing about the laugh. He only walked a little slower after it so that the round on the cobbles might last a moment longer. And he showed the boy how to keep his heels down and his hands soft. And once, when Thomas swayed, the Earl's hand left the bridle and came up to the small of the boy's back, steady, sure, and was taken away again the instant it was not needed, as though he had touched something he was not certain he was permitted to touch. Eleanor watched from the gallery window unseen, and her chest hurt in a way she had no name for and would not have given a name if she had. She told herself it was the cold. She told herself a great many things. Her body, which had always been the more honest of the two, knew exactly where he was in every room before she saw him, turned toward the door an instant before he came through it, warmed at a cool wrist when his voice carried from the hall. She had spent 6 years building a wall, brick by patient brick, and he had walked up to it and simply stood there not pushing, and the wall had begun to feel less like safety and more like a room she had locked herself inside. Once on the second evening, they had passed on the stair with the whole household between them and below them, and he had stood aside to let her go up, perfectly correct, his hand on the rail an inch from where hers would fall, and she had climbed past him with her eyes ahead, and her breath gone shallow, and her pulse loud in her own ears. For the length of 3 steps, the warmth of him at her shoulder, like standing too near a fire in winter. And she had not looked, and she had wanted to look, and the wanting had frightened her more than any word the dowager had yet spoken. At the top of the stair, she had stopped and pressed her cool palm flat against the cooler wall until her heart consented to be quiet. And she had told herself that this was nothing, that she had felt this once before, and been ruined by it, and she had gone in to her son. The dowager moved on the 3rd day. She was not a woman who left a thing to chance, and she had spent her life understanding that the surest way to remove an inconvenient woman was not to fight her, but to make her impossible. She summoned the household and certain favored guests to the long drawing-room on the pretext of music. And there, with Penhallow at the piano and the rain on the tall windows, she produced her instrument. It was a man. He came in travel dirty, and pleased with himself, a thin, sandy person named Mr. Felix Carroll, and he announced to the company with a bow that he was come to fetch his wife who had run off from him in Bath these many months and led him a chase across 3 counties, and that he was very sorry for any trouble she had caused so noble a house. Eleanor went white. "I have never seen this man," she said. "I am not married. I have never been called Caro but the name I was born to, and he is not of my family." "My own wife," the man said sorrowfully. "She always did tell a good tale." The dowager folded her hands. The trap was very neat. A married woman who had fled her husband was a woman of no character at all, and her child, a thing best not inquired into, and any claim she might make against an earl, became at a stroke the spite of a runaway, with a grievance. The room, which had been uncertain, began to settle toward the comfortable old verdict. Penhallow's hands resumed the keys. And the dowager, gentle now, almost kind, said the thing she had been building toward for 3 days. Said it softly, so that it would carry. Said it as a woman states a settled fact. "You see how it is," she said. "She is no one. A governess and nothing more, with a husband she has abandoned and a child she uses as a key. Marcus, send her away tonight before she shames you further." It was the 3rd time. Eleanor had heard a version of it on the steps in the rain and at the dinner table over the silver, and now, here in the warm drawing-room, with a hired liar bowing, by the piano, and each time it had been spoken by a different mouth, in a different room, and each time it had been meant to close a door. She felt the old wall, the patient bricks, and she felt how easy it would be to simply let the door close, to take Thomas and walk back down the avenue and be no one in peace. She had done it before. She knew the way. She did not do it. She turned to the sandy man and she said in the clear governess voice that had quieted 100 unruly schoolrooms, "Tell the company my husband's Christian name. Tell them the church we were married in. Tell them the name of the man who paid you. To stand in this room tonight," and when he opened his mouth and nothing came because he had been given a part and not a history, she turned from him as one turns from a thing of no further interest, and she looked at Marcus and she said, "I will not be sent away tonight. I will go in the morning, on my own feet, as I came. I will not be put out a door at the word of a man your mother bought in a coaching inn. I have one thing in this house worth more than your name, and he is asleep, upstairs, and I came to give him a chance, at a father. And that is all I came for. Believe me or do not, I am done asking to be believed." The room was utterly silent. The piano had stopped. And into that silence the dowager made her single mistake, the mistake of the confidently right, and said, "Marcus, I forbid you to indulge this. Think of the name." Marcus crossed the room. He did not hurry. He crossed the long drawing room of Harrogate Court in the unhurried way of a man who has finally stopped pretending, past the diamond at the piano, past the hired liar, past his mother with her cane, and he stopped before Eleanor in her borrowed gray gown, and he reached into his coat, and he held it up so the company could see it without yet being able to read it. "This is the register copy of my marriage," he said, his voice level and carrying to every corner of the room, "to Eleanor, 6 years past, at the Church of St. Aldwyn. Thomas is my son and my heir." 11 words for the thing that mattered, and then the register copy for the proof. He had carried it on his person for 3 days since the boy had said his name in the hall. The silence after the line was a physical thing. It had weight. It pressed on the candle flames. Penhallow's hands came off the keys and lay in her ice-blue lap. The hired man was already moving toward the door. Having understood his employment was concluded. And the dowager, Lady Margaret, who had protected the name for 40 years, made a small sound, the cane slipping an inch on the parquet, her free hand rising to the back of a chair, and the composure of 4 decades came apart at the seams in front of the people she had spent her life impressing. "You wrote the letter," Marcus said to her not cruelly, which was the worst of it, because cruelty she could have armored against. He said it quietly, almost with grief. "You wrote it in a hand like mine, and you sent it to Bath. And you told me she had taken a settlement, and you have let me believe for 6 years that the only person I ever wanted, that she did not want me. My son has been cold in lodging-houses while you kept the green room aired for guests." The dowager did not deny it. That was her last dignity, and she kept it. She lowered herself into the chair her hand had found, and she looked at the boy's mother in gray, and she said, in a voice that had lost all its diamonds, "I did what was required of me. I always have." And then, after a moment lower, to no one. Perhaps to the husband 40 years buried, whose name she had spent her life defending. It was a great deal to require. The solicitor came up from the village the next morning, for the Earl had sent for him at first light, and the register copy was sworn and witnessed, and a thing no dowager's word could unmake. And the sandy man named Felix was found to have already fled in the night, which surprised no one. Penhallow's carriage was called for after breakfast, and she went without seeing, being a sensible girl who knew when a field was lost, and she was married within the year to a baron in the next county, and was, by all accounts, content. The dowager was not turned out. Marcus would not do it, and Eleanor asked, would not have it done. A house was opened to her on the coast, a good house with a view of the sea, and she went to it in the spring with 2 maids and her diamonds and her cane, and she wrote once a stiff letter to Eleanor that was almost an apology, and Eleanor answered it kindly, because the wall had come down and there was room now for that. What Eleanor remembered after was not the drawing room, or the register, or even the line itself. What she remembered was the morning that followed, the first clear morning in a week, when the rain had finally gone and the lawns of Harrogate steamed faintly in the new sun. She had not slept. She had sat by Thomas's bed in the green room, watching his chest rise and fall. The cough loosed at last, and toward dawn she had wrapped herself in the housekeeper's shawl and gone down through the quiet house and out onto the terrace, and she had found Marcus already there, in his shirt-sleeves in the cold. Looking out at the avenue she had walked up 4 days before with mud to her knee. He did not turn when she came out. He had learned, perhaps, that she did not like to be watched arriving. After a while he said, "I rode to Bath. The winter after. Did you know that? I rode to the lodging the letter named, and they had never heard of you. I thought it was the proof. I thought it meant you had taken the money and given a false direction, and gone a long breath. It never once occurred to me that the address was false because the letter was. I know that now," she said. "I should have looked harder. A wiser man would have looked harder. You were 400 miles away, burying everyone you loved, and a woman you had every reason to trust was lying to you with great skill." She came to stand beside him at the balustrade. not touching the cold stone under both their hands an inch apart. I have spent 6 years hating you for a thing you did not do. I should like to stop. I am very tired of it. He turned then. In the gray first light, his face had nothing of the frost earl in it at all, and his hand came off the stone and crossed the inch between them, and covered hers. And this time it arrived, and she let it. "Stay," he said. One word, the same command he had given her in the rain on the steps, and this time she heard the whole of it, the thing folded inside the order, the thing the rain had heard before she would. Not for his sake. I would have you stay for his sake, and call it duty, and we would both know. It was a lie. Stay, because I have been cold for 6 years, and you are the only warm thing I have ever found, and I let them take you once, and I will not survive doing it twice. It came out of him in pieces the way true things do. And Eleanor, who had taught herself never to want what she could not keep, turned her hand over under his so that their palms met. And that was her answer, and it was enough. They were married again in the early summer, quietly in the same country church with the same kind of small company, the sexton older now, and the same light through the same plain windows, and Thomas stood between them in a new coat and held the ring on a cushion with terrible seriousness. There was no crowd. There were no diamonds. The dowager sent a christening cup of old silver and her regrets, and did not come, and that was understood, and forgiven, and right. That winter the snow came early to Harrogate, and it fell all one long afternoon past the tall windows of the small sitting room the family used, the room with the good fire and the worn chairs, not the great cold drawing-room where the verdict had been spoken and unspoken. Eleanor sat by the hearth with her mending, and Marcus sat across from her with a book he was not reading, and Thomas lay on the rug between them building something out of wooden blocks that kept falling down, and the fat old pony was warm in its stall, and the snow came down on the avenue and filled in, kindly, the last of the ruts the carriages had cut in the autumn mud. On the low table by Eleanor's chair lay the folded letter, the one true letter, the one he had written her from the regiment before the world fell in, soft as cloth. Now from 6 years against her heart and 1 year on a happier table. She did not need to carry it any longer. She had stopped a few weeks after the wedding, taking it out to read. She had not put it away either, and she did not think she would, because some things are kept, not because they are needed, but because they were survived. Thomas's tower fell again, and he sighed the enormous sigh of the very young, and Marcus set down his unread book, and got down onto the rug in his shirt-sleeves, and Earl on the floor of his own sitting-room, and showed the boy how to set the wide blocks at the bottom, and the narrow ones above, and the tower stood. Eleanor watched the dark head, and the small one bent together over the wooden blocks in the firelight, the snow at the window, the letter on the table, the warm room that was, at last, and against every verdict, the world had spoken. Her home. She set another stitch. She did not hurry it. There was no longer anywhere she had to be. By morning, the fire settled, the snow came down, the tower stood. Thank you for staying to the end of Eleanor's story. If a moment in it stayed with you, I would be glad to know which one. Wherever you are watching from tonight, may the door you have been knocking at finally open.